Mishcon Academy digital sessions.
My name's Stephen Bostock. I'm a partner in the immigration group at Mishcon Reya, and I'll be your host today. At today's Mishcon Academy digital session, we will be considering the challenges to and the opportunities for the UK tech sector, focusing on the UK tech talent deficit. I would like to first of all introduce Aveek Bhattacharya, who's Chief Economist and Lead Researcher on Education Policy at the Social Market Foundation. We're also joined by Sherry Coutu, a serial entrepreneur, angel investor and board member of various companies, charities and universities, including Workfinder, the Scale Up Institute and the University of Cambridge. And finally, Dr Simon Hepworth, who is Director of Enterprise at Imperial College London. And Sherry, if you wouldn't mind if I put this first question to you, really just kind of getting everyone and the audience comfortable with the idea of a tech talent deficit in the UK. I mean, do you think one exists? And if it does, what are the causes and the extent?
I definitely think that one exists, and it exists across all sectors, and it affects all companies. When we survey the CEOs of the fast growing companies that are growing at 10, 20, 30% per annum, it is one of the top 5 issues that they can't hire people with the appropriate tech skills in order to fulfill their customer orders. And this affects about 85% of them as their number one, but it affects all of them in their top 5. If you think about large companies, and you might turn to the CBI for their data, it is listed as the number 1 issue affecting competitive advantage in the UK for the large companies and small companies as well. And that means that the companies face a burden when they're onboarding new people of having to upskill them rapidly because they don't have the skills that they need to get to work. So one of the things that we can do is we can import people who have that skill set. That doesn't do much for your inventory of domestic talent, but it does allow the fast-growing companies and the larger companies to be able to get access to that. So it does exist. It is acute. It's chronic, and it's acute, and it's getting worse. The reason it's getting worse is because the industry's reconfiguring themselves, and the technological changes and the changes in our competitors are also changing.
How do we get to this position? You know, the government's constantly talking about tech and the 4th industrial revolution. There's lots of international competition. How has this been allowed to happen?
Well, it's happening in many countries because of the rate that the economies are changing. So it's not unique to the United Kingdom. It's on many people's agendas, but it's very hard to adjust swings of 8,000% over a 3-year period. That you have seen huge increases in short stackable courses so that you could relieve this friction. The recommendations we made at the Khalifa review and also the Scale Up Institute was allow us to import people really, really easily. And then universities should be making sure that they're aligned with the fast growing companies in particular. Another response you've seen is around internships, part-time work when you're at university, and also apprentices. I think we should see a lot more of that.
Aveek, it kind of brings us on to an interesting question for you, I think, which is in relation to the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. What school-age education policies are the government actually implementing to increase the flow of talent into these specific sectors that would probably have an enormous benefit on tech in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is recognised as an issue that the government wants to work on. It clearly is a cluster of subjects that's being prioritised, and there's a recognition that it is hard for university colleges to kind of catch students up if they don't have the basic grounding that you need to be able to go on to degree or even sub-degree level qualifications. So there have been some initiatives. For example, there's been a big focus on recruiting and retaining high qualified maths and physics teachers in particular. But one area I think that's going to be particularly important, and this is across the piece, but STEM is a particularly kind of important part of it, is I think there's a recognition in a whole range of things I've looked at on education that careers advice and guidance isn't often as good as it could be.
Simon, I think that kind of moves on quite neatly to your area of expertise as well. I mean, I wonder if you know roughly what the current UK population undertaking STEM degrees is, and what the government might want to do to try to increase this.
So the data I looked at said it was about 47% were going into STEM subjects. And what I can't tell you is how competitive that is on a global landscape, but the numbers seem pretty good to me. We need to make STEM as attractive as possible. So I think that goes right back to the role models side of that. And so having young people aspire to great people working in STEM. I think some of it is changing the perception that an engineer is not just somebody that fixes your car, but actually they're working on fantastic science projects like going to Mars, for example. Scholarships are always great to just reduce the barriers for people entering into STEM.
I mean, 47% figure seems quite high actually, which is good to hear. But what percentage roughly, or do you know how successful we are at converting them into work in their specialist field?
I'm a net at Pearson, and in their study, it's less than 50% of people end up working in the same area where their degree is at the moment. So it's a global learning study.
And I think that chimes with the Royal Academy of Engineering report from a couple of years back that said the same thing. But actually, a glass half full, I actually thought about half going through was probably quite a good, given that people have got huge choice about what careers they want to take.
Yeah, well, and I think if careers are changing out of all recognition as well, that it's very hard to sort of say, well, I'm going to be an engineer, whatever that means, when what that means is changing very, very, very rapidly. So I'm not surprised about the criticism around careers advice. I think it would be anybody who's in careers advice would be having a hard time at the moment. I think it's more about equipping young people to navigate an uncertain future that we as educators at university should probably be thinking about, and accept that it's okay. If you studied this subject, don't expect to be in it forever, because nobody's ever in anything forever any longer.
I think there's arguments, arguably, that there's over-specialization at 16, but at 18, it's very unusual for someone not to go down one path or the other. And that seems, given especially what Sherry was saying about the long kind of life that people have stretching out in front of them, that seems potentially counterproductive.
I know we touched on it briefly before, but it'd be interesting to get your thoughts in a bit more detail on what these barriers are, to retraining and upskilling the UK workforce specifically. Is there anything unique to Brits, or is it a global issue that other countries are having as well?
I think the single most important thing that we can do is get students in university right now doing work experience. You learn by making. We don't just learn by studying in books. We know that. We learn by making things and doing things. So working on projects in real tech companies alongside your degrees is perfect. Yeah,
and Aveek, just to bring you in on this as well, I mean, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what the government could do to help incentivize, the retraining of the workforce, possibly even financially. Is that something that you think would be a sensible idea?
There's a vision kind of starting to emerge, which is moving away from this very linear model of you do your education and training from 18 to 20, and then you go into work, and then that's you done for the next 6 years. And what Sherry's suggesting is we break that up, and we have work interspersed with learning, and then the learning coming back kind of later through your life. And it seems to me that's the only way we can respond to the kind of fast moving tech world, the fact that your skills are going to develop, the fact you don't know what skills you're going to need when you're 30 or 40. In the last decade, adult education funding has been halved. There's 1.3 billion pounds less going into adult education every year than there was in about 2010.
What are the risks to the UK tech industry if this doesn't get resolved in the next year, in the next 5 years? How do we see this kind of playing out over the next few years? Sherry, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Businesses will go elsewhere, and their tax dollars will go elsewhere, and the lessons to be learned by the people who would be at the universities doing part-time work at these companies, will also, it just won't happen. So I think it's a crisis, and I think it's the worst crisis that we could face.
And Simon, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to do the best science, we need to attract the brightest talent from around the world. And we do that today because it's a great place to be, because we're creative. If we lose some of that, the attraction goes, then our quality standards in education, I think, will also fall.
And Aveek, your thoughts?
One thing that is worth watching kind of post-pandemic is we've seen a lot of people working remotely. There is an open question about how far that is going to be international. So it isn't, even if we have a British-based business, there is no requirement for them if they can employ people in other countries that have the skills.
The government's levelling up agenda, which we heard so much about in 2019, it's starting to come back, and it seems the people of Hartlepool bought into the idea. But Sherry, what role do you think the tech sector can play in this, in accelerating regional economic and social recovery across the country?
Well, I think it's a joint role between the companies and the universities in every town up and down the UK. I don't think you should have to leave where you live, either to go to university or to work. I'm in favor of the levelling up agenda, and I think it's easier with the use of Zoom because we can access people from wherever.
Aveek, from your perspective, what tech industry policies could the government bring in to help on this levelling up agenda?
There's a real risk of, if this is done cack-handedly or brute forced rather than developing organically. But we can think of lots of examples already, I think, of tech firms, more or less broadly construed, that do kind of have a clear kind of link to place, and often places that are not the most glamorous. So I'm from the northeast of Scotland, I'm from Aberdeen, but just down the coast in Dundee, we have a world-leading video games industry. I think a lot of this is about networking and facilitating, kind of getting the right people in the room together so that the skills kind of lead through to the businesses. I think that this is kind of an important issue for universities and tech companies, both of whom are in danger of being seen politically as a bit rootless. So there could be kind of huge PR and political kind of benefits of being seen to be good citizens in this regard. And hopefully, I think there is an equilibrium that is good for everyone.
You kind of got central government trying to plan how the economy develops, certainly on the tech side. I mean, do you think that's helpful? Is there a place for this being centrally managed, or is it best to leave it to the private sector?
I think it's an extremely complex thing to try and centrally manage. So I wouldn't envy anybody that had that job. So I would be more in favour of supporting groups locally to be better versions of themselves. So I think universities can be great seeds of that, great beacons for entrepreneurship locally. But I think it's a long and hard journey. I think it's 5 to 10 years to really build any kind of cluster around them.
Yeah, and so one last question I think we've just got time for. And this is to you all, really. The UK is really kind of putting itself out there as this is where we want to see the economy growing over the next few years and beyond. Who are we competing with? Are we competing globally? Is there a local competitive market in Western Europe? Are we competing with California? Are we competing with China for this tech investment and flow of people? Who are our main competition? And maybe what could we learn from those that are clearly doing it better, given where we are on the list?
This isn't necessarily about beating other countries. This is about equipping our country with the skills that it needs in order to be able to succeed and prosper and thrive, or even to just take advantage of the innovations that are happening in other countries. So the UK, it'll vary from sector to sector, but in lots of industries, the UK is not at the kind of frontier of innovation, but just to take and in some ways that's a good position to be. If you look at what's happened in China and in Korea over the 20th century, the reason they were able to grow so quickly was because they could catch up. But even if you're going to catch up with the countries at the frontier, you kind of need to have the skills to be able to translate that.
And I think I look at it as removing the friction for a business leader who is operating in the UK and in other places. If it's harder for them to find the talent that they need here, and they also operate by their own free choice in a number of other jurisdictions, then if it's easier elsewhere, they will do it elsewhere because they have a need to do that. In other jurisdictions, the employers are absolutely reporting that they can get what they want from those systems more easily than ours. And that's what we keep on hearing.
Absolutely. And Simon, closing thoughts on that? We've got about 30 seconds. So I don't know if you have any thoughts
in
on
deep science, deep technology, in the university setting, it is absolutely a global competition. So our competitors are the MITs, the Stanfords, the Harvards of this world, in addition to Oxford, Cambridge in the UK.
Well, look, thanks for that. And thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for today, unfortunately. Enjoy the afternoon, enjoy the sunshine, hopefully, and see you on our next session. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.